first is that society does not want minor police interactions escalating into tragedies. Our job as a police department is to not explain how that happens. Our job is to try to prevent that from happening. Society has high expectations of us. We understand that. And we want them to know that we have high expectations of ourselves. We understand that our mere presence at times is a mere escalation to whatever the situation is. And we strive to create a community of partnership, mutual respect, and an environment of safety for all. As we go into the program, we're going to guide ourselves and our actions by our department philosophy, which is going to maintain 4 principles: that we're going to be accountable at all times and take responsibility for our actions and responsibility to make changes, that we're going to communicate with everyone at all times. We're going to listen, learn, and collaborate and be true partners. That we're going to embody the principles of procedural justice, fairness and consistency, voice and representation, and impartiality and transparency. And through this process, we're going to learn and evolve. When we talk about our evolution, we're going to focus on 4 things as well. The first is a team approach. The old saying is 2 heads is better than 1. And police work, it absolutely is, and many things as well. But we always get better outcomes and better decisions when we collaborate with ourselves, seek others' opinions, and take a team approach. And that will certainly be the case in us moving forward. And it has been for years. Like I said, we're going to see the process of formalizing good police work. We're going to change our focus and prioritize locating complainants on calls that are not of a life, safety, or priority nature. Discovering the facts of what has happened and understanding what is all in place and has taken place prior to taking action is the key to making sure we have good outcomes. That will be a priority. We're going to make informed decisions. Dispatchers, officers, supervisors are going to gather as much information as possible prior to getting to the scene. Again, making an informed decision on the information that we have. And we're going to develop a culture of what we are calling tap in and tap out. Every officer needs to feel comfortable either stepping in and trying a different approach with something someone else is doing isn't working, or being comfortable stepping out and not being offended if it's them that are not able to achieve what they're trying to do. When you lay all this into a process, it gives us a bunch of layers of tasks and action items and things that all work in conjunction with each other, that support each other through the process, and in the end help us achieve better outcomes. It's not one layer and one system that if the one thing fails, we have a bad outcome. And together they work very well together. And in the end, we will strive to evaluate and debrief and learn from each other and share those experiences so we can improve going forward. As we go through this process and go about our work, we will always strive to remember that people want to be treated with respect, that people prefer to be asked to do things rather than to be told, that people want to know why we're doing what we're doing and why we went to do something, and that people desire options rather than threats, and that people always prefer a second chance. A big part of this process is going to include community engagement. It's a big priority at all levels of the department. We're going to focus on listening, learning, collaborating, as we mentioned before, work to acknowledge and understand the perceptions and feelings of others, and be transparent in everything that we do. And like I said in the beginning, this is something that a lot of police officers have done for a long time. It's just good police work. But again, we're going to formalize this process. One thing I wanted to highlight is that all of these things take time in terms of when an officer goes to do these things and engage at a call or with a community member. When you have an officer that responds to a call and handles that call and leaves and goes to take another call, it's a shorter time span. There's more officer time available. These things all take time. And I think this is truly the way we need to go in the future to get to achieve our goals. But I think it's very important that the board understand that as we pursue that, officers are going to spend more time on calls. I'd like to just give a quick example of something that occurred right after May 1st, where this was experienced by one of our officers. We had a call to retail theft at Walgreens. Officers responded. We got a description of the subject, direction of travel. They located the subject on the train, yellow line, and was getting ready to head out of town. And a verbal threat from the subject was given to the officers that they were not going to go get arrested and taken into custody. Traditionally, under most response models, he would have been placed into custody and there would have been some sort of use of force. What occurred that day was a 30-minute conversation by the officer who asked other officers to step back, and they eventually convinced him to give himself up and taken into custody without any use of force. But again, that takes time. Part of the budget submission has a $25,000 for a CoResponder pilot program. I want to talk briefly about that program. It began May 1st and is partnering Health and Human Services and social workers with fire department and police department personnel as they respond to calls. Our current protocol is to have communicators and supervisors attempt to identify calls that may contain a mental health component or a crisis, where a social worker or where a CIT officer would be beneficial. On those calls, a CIT officer is automatically dispatched. A CIT officer responds, and now under this pilot program, once the CIT officer is there, if he determines that a social worker present on the scene will be beneficial, they will be requested and they will respond to the scene. And then together with the CIT officer, the social worker will transition to the primary role. And the goal is to provide linkage of services immediately at the time of crisis. Under our traditional model of response, the CIT officer or a officer that handled the call we may have to voluntarily take someone to the hospital or take a report and leave. And then days later, a social worker will follow up and try to link that individual to those services. This tries to do that at the time of the crisis. Hope is that doing that, you get a better linkage rate, a better follow-up rate. They get services quicker and faster, and it would eventually reduce the amount of times we have to respond to that location of that individual and give them the help that they need. The program is underway. As I mentioned, it runs through the end of May, and then we'll conduct an evaluation and look at the data. We are definitely tracking the data as we go through this process, both on the police department and fire department and the social work side of things. Just to give you an example, we started tracking data back in November in terms of how many calls of this nature we have. So we had an idea of the volume that we might potentially be looking at. And we, on average, since November, have been looking at about 56 calls a month where an officer thinks the social worker on scene will be beneficial. So we'll see how that plays out as we go through the actual pilot program phase and look at the successes and outcomes or challenges as well for the program at the end. Also on the budget is $75,000 for a pilot body-worn camera program. The body-worn camera program is definitely something that is, supported wholeheartedly by the police department, and I believe by probably most every officer. And it has been challenging in the past because it is an extremely complex and very asking program, both financially and from the staffing perspective. For a 5-year, just to give you an example of what lies ahead, as I'm sure all aware, the law that was passed in Illinois back in January requires that we obtain body-worn cameras for the department by January 2024. Estimates from vendors indicate that the cost of that program over the first 5 years will be approximately $1.2 million. And in addition to that, there's a number of costs associated on top of that. The primary one being staff time of individuals to administer that program. We, part of the pilot program is going to be to learn, what is the actual staffing that's required, because we're going to be answering a lot more subpoenas, a lot more FOIAs. We're going to have requirements to manage the user end and do a redaction of video, tagging and flagging. There's a whole lot of administrative requirements that come with this program. Departments similar in size to us seem to have 2 individuals that are doing that administration. So if you add that in, it's about a $2.1 million program over the first 5 years. With that, I will be happy to entertain any questions that you have regarding our budget. Yes, Christine.
You want to talk a little bit about the CoResponder Program?
Sure. So it started with all the stakeholders meeting together. John Lockery was there, Brian Baker, Jeff Olflick, and Mike Charlie. And we talked about the idea of it and how we could use our current infrastructure to get the process going. And I want to say to Chief Baker that I was really, really appreciative of his openness and his willingness and his way of communicating to his police officers. Because they have been coming up to me and telling me that they are happy about the program. And so that's like the first step, is to have stakeholders really invested and involved. And the same thing with the social workers. And then we also met with social service agencies who were very excited about the program. So excited that they all want to be part of it in some way, but they also want to get paid. So just to be clear, but the collaboration was incredible, and I want to thank you, Chief Baker, for that. I did want to add that also one of the purposes for the social worker coming, the police department are the only people that can involuntarily take people to the hospital. Even the ambulances can't do that. But the hope is that, especially in a trauma case, you don't want to force somebody to do something. That's exactly what has happened to them their whole life. So the idea of the social worker coming and being able to talk to them and have them voluntarily go to the hospital changes the process from that moment on. And so that's part of my hope, that a police officer won't have to involuntarily commit somebody. That's re-traumatizing somebody who potentially could have already suffered from trauma from that. So that's another piece of it that I just wanted to make sure is clear. And we'll see what the data comes up with when it has to be collected during May, and then we'll go from there. My hope or my fantasy is that there's some grant dollars from either federal grant dollars or state grant dollars to help support the program, and we'll see if things move forward.
There is a bill that's being negotiated at the federal level, a policing bill. And one of the things they're talking about is 2 potential grant programs. One is body cameras. You can only imagine putting all of these police forces across the country stuck in the salivate. I don't know where they're going to find it. They probably will be billions of dollars, but that is one. And then the other one is the CoResponder Program. A lot of departments across the country. Thank you. Allison.
Thank you. I support anything that would de-escalate a situation. Of course, I'd like to say on record, I support anything these departments are to do to serve our community. But I have 2 questions. One is, how do you qualify the success of the program?
The CoResponder Program? That's a good question. I think we have to further collaborate that with Health and Human Services. Mike Shirley and establish some criteria, and part of it is looking at recidivism rates with individuals prior to the program and then after the program. Reduce the amount of calls. Another thing that they're looking at, I believe, is were they actually connected to services, or are they going to those services as well?
And my second question is, understandably, you suggested that if you're in that situation, that you bring in other resources, that extend the amount of time that you're working with the person to de-escalate the problem. However, if you're doing that, then is it taking away from your ability, the police's ability to handle other calls? The extended time takes time.
Yes, and it's all a numbers game, right? Depending on how many calls service we get in this nature and how much we're dealing with, you know, other calls that are coming in at the same time are going to wait, right? I mean, just to give you another example, we had a call a few weeks ago, an individual was locked out of their house, a couple that were very locked out of their house, couldn't get back in. The person that locked the other person out was having a crisis. And traditionally, we would have taken that person into custody probably right away. The officers on the scene spent an hour talking to that individual. We eventually opened the door and we eventually voluntarily went to the hospital.
But that hour took them off of what their duties are if there were other calls. So how do we handle other emergencies at the same time if you have officers who are engaged in our situation?
Well, we already have a system where we prioritize calls. So low priority calls will wait. Unfortunately, residents will have to wait for officers to show up for parking problem, for example. But if that call comes in, it will be dispatched. A priority call that comes in would automatically be dispatched. Officer from another vehicle take that call instead of the lead officer who might be tied up on the call is taken for.
So you don't feel necessarily that we're reducing the services to our residents with this additional time spent? I'm mixed about it because I think it's very important to escalate the situation. But are we then, serving the community at the same time? How do we balance that?
I think that it's going to be part of learning process going forward. Because again, it all depends on how many of these calls we get at once and what the impact of that is in relation to other calls. I honestly don't think we know what that will be yet.
And again, I want to go on record that I'm supportive and I'm thankful and grateful to our law enforcement.
Hey guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for. I just have a couple of questions and comments. You mentioned right away that there's a lot of trauma in our nation right now, especially the races I see. I just wrote down three T's: trauma, trigger, and trust. So there's clearly a direct connection in all three of them, I believe. Recognizing that there are people in the community who have suffered directly or indirectly from trauma, being triggered by sirens, and also, which is really impacting trust that they have of law enforcement. And I know there's a lot of conversations with police officers. Everything is kind of good. And the CoResponder Program too is really nice. It's really appreciate how it really kind of calls attention to the potential social, emotional, or well-being of the citizens. So I'm just wondering, one, the CIT officers, the citizens who don't like a CIT officer is can just tell about what those officers do. I wondered if they wear uniforms. When I was thinking about what it could potentially cost for those. And also just curious to know the pros and cons that you have for the coast guard. President, that you want, you know, fine. So I'm just curious to know the pros and cons that you see with the program, recognizing.
Sure. So CIT is Crisis Intervention Team, which is what it stands for. And it's a special training that individual officers go through that gives them training on mental health illnesses that frequently we come into contact with, how those differ from each other, positive ways to potentially interact with people that are suffering a crisis that have those illnesses, and good tactics to deal with those individuals, depending on what the signs and symptoms are. And then they actually go through role play. So it's a long class where they actually have role players come in and they practice what they've learned and actually, talk through scenarios. So that's what CIT is. Our goal is to have 100% of the department CIT trained. We're not there yet. We currently have about 54 out of the total, 85 individuals control the street. But we have about 54 out of the total 100 scoring currently. And like I said, our goal is to get 100%. And we're doing everything we can to get everybody in classes. They do wear uniforms. They have a CIT badge that they wear on their uniform. But these are officers that are, assigned to beats and patrolling beats and going to normal calls for service. And it's very important for those non-CIT related calls that they be readily identifiable as the police. So that I understand the issue, but I don't know how to get past that with the way we have to, employ our CIT officers. When you talk about the pros and cons, I think with the current CoResponder program, the way it's set up, I think the individual officer, there's a response time to the social worker, right? And I think that's probably the biggest con we have currently is when the officer determines that they need a social worker, there's a amount of time before that social worker arrives. And it's how long is that time to be, what to do with that time. But I think the biggest con that is currently present.
Perhaps I should have used the word challenge.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
I think when you look at challenges,
Yeah.
strikes brings attention to what
Yeah.
to do. So,
Sorry.
But I think it makes up a question, if I can follow up. One of the things you'll be studying, I assume, is how many social workers you need, like in the evenings, and what do you do if you get 2 or 3 calls at once? Would you require a social worker? Right. I mean, management is going to be important.
Absolutely.
Question, yes, I assume.
Yes. And through the study, we'll hopefully have a better understanding of the demand and a better answer to that question.
yeah, the trust piece.
Yes.
Just talk about that trust. How do you think that a program like this help build trust?
I think the biggest thing is, I think first of all, our CIT officers, I think they're fantastic. Fabulous job of really trying to connect individuals and really trying to get them to do what's best for them at that moment. You know what I mean? And I think the presence of a social worker is just going to reinforce the fact that we don't want to resolve this with an involuntary committal or arrest. We want to resolve this with the best outcome for that individual. And I think as we do that with individuals, we'll hopefully build that trust with them. And we'll see that, you know, that's our intent and that's what we want. That's the outcome we want to have. And hopefully others will see that as well. And I think it's got to be built one person at a time.
Thank you. You got to tell the story, right? You got to tell the story.
Yes,
of this.
correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to ask one question about the body cameras, the other side of the coin. With social media, it seems that to poke pride and go to an officer is like sport now. And they can give lessons on how to do it. I don't know if you've seen any of those videos, but I get a lot of time on it. I just want to know how we can protect our officers, the people taking up an officer's time. You think to answer questions, is it a crime? Can we make it a crime? Because I've seen them where they last a half hour. And they're interacting and they're getting, and nobody's getting anywhere except the gentleman who's doing it is getting great personal satisfaction. So I want to know how we can address that. Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer. You know, from an individual that's really, you know, has some issues, and those issues may be getting in the way of us trying to, you know, make an arrest or, you know, do whatever we need to do from a lawful perspective to someone that's trying to kind of bait the system and have a look at something else. I'm not sure how we handle that, other than train our officers well, to always be professional, always be respectful, and to try to, you know, make good decisions that are supported by everything I talked about earlier. I think it's a case by case basis, but I can certainly see circumstances where we're spending a lot of time trying not to do something when in the end, it's just maybe we're going to have to do it anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we navigate that.
But we all come up with an answer. I like I said, I watched it. And it's very cathartic.
Yeah.
That's one other question. Power number.
We currently have 150, you're looking for sworn?
Yeah.
We currently have 115 sworn positions in the fiscal year 2020.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kim?
Yeah, so we talked about the CIT option being dispatched first. And then if determined. Do they have to have a like CIT option?
It's a good question, and I understand where you're coming from. The problem on our end is, or the challenge is that I don't know. I don't have a percentage for you, but a very large percentage of calls that come in, when the officer actually gets there, it's not what we were told. You know what I mean? So trying to know whether you're gonna definitely leave a social worker or not is a hard thing to determine when they call in. Depending on who's calling. We certainly could maybe learn as the process goes forward and try to identify those calls. And, you know, hey, these always definitely result in being a social worker, and we get out very easily and call in right away. Yes. In most cases, officer response to the scene was really 3 to 5 minutes. So that, and then maybe an initial, you know, assessment by them takes another 5 to 10 minutes. So, but 20 minutes may matter. So Good point.
Chief, thank you for your presentation. This, what you said, this CoResponder program is one of the parts of this budget that I'm most excited to see. And I certainly hope that future phases of this perhaps would lead to some kind of legitimate alternate response to social workers, first responders. My big question is about funding, and perhaps this might be a question for John too. If in this current phase, 2 of the 3 social workers are from health and human services, and if the aftercare case management is also going to be health and human services, my big question is why are these funds only post human services?
So, in full disclosure, when we were developing this program, Police Chief Baker said to me, this should be budgeted in the Health and Human Services budget. And at that point, we were looking at it, or I was looking at it as these calls are coming into the 911 center, and we are trying to serve our community that is asking for help for whatever reason. And so whether this is funded in the police department budget or the Health and Human Services budget, it's still the village's operating budget. But currently, there are communities, for example, that have an alternative response program, or they're thinking about implementing those. And they talk about how some of the calls that will be diverted to that type of team, alternative response team, are related to homeless people. Well, our Health and Human Services Department already is the front people or the key staff that are interacting with homeless people. It's not necessarily police. I mean, there are situations when the police will interact with homeless people, but the Health and Human Services staff are designed and really charged with interacting with them and making homeless people with services. And so when people are currently contacting 911, we're looking to provide the best service we can. And so it's part of the police budget at this point.
So forgive my naivete. What is the homeless population that we interact with in the village of Spring?
You know, it depends. There's not a large homeless population. At some moments in time, there's 0. At some points in time, there may be 3 to 6 individuals. There's a few spots in town where there have been individuals that are homeless have decided to live, whether it's the village green between the village hall and the library, whether it's a bus stop in the downtown area or Oakland Street, or it's under the bridges along McCormick Boulevard. Those are 3 of the areas where we've had homeless people within the last 4 to 5 years at different times. Or living in the front.
So my perception is what I would expect to have said. I don't think
And
it's grows like Chicago. We're still a small village, so we're not facing as many homeless people as other places are.
There are different definitions of homeless. There are individuals that schools may classify as homeless because they're living with friends or family, not in a typical family situation. And so there is that type of situation that occurs in town as well. I think the school districts would speak to that and say that that happens. But there, a few years ago, Mayor Van Duzen, police chief, and I went and met with the local aldermen in Chicago and Lincolnwood representatives. And we said, you know, there are homeless individuals along McCormick. And so the 3 entities really had a concerted effort to provide services to those individuals. So there was actually a boat that went on the canal with all of the resources that you could imagine. It was a multi-week process of let's get to know the individuals, let's get to understand why they're living where they are and meet them where they are and provide the services that we can. And so it's an example of some of what we've done with the homeless population. It is the individuals without a place to live is few and far between.
Quick comment. I just do want to go back to the goals. Being with accountability. involved with communication and I think finding our cameras is a piece of that. So I think it fits nicely with adults. And I think I'm very excited about that piece.
John, I think maybe usually we serve public comments until we can. But we do have some specific to this. So why, if it's okay with everybody, why don't we just
Actually, I have two more. Can I ask two more
go
questions?
ahead, go ahead.
For full implementation of that, I guess my big question is why is the pilot program full here? Do we need a full year for the pilot before full implementation is feasible?
I would say the main obstacle to implementing before early would be the budgeted funds. Right? If they're not in this budget. The early implementation, it wouldn't be there.
Yeah, the current program is being handled with existing staff, but it's not sustainable. And so it's a 30-day pilot for a concentrated period of time to give us experience to build either a phase 2 of a pilot that may need a phase 3, or maybe we're ready to.
Let's correspond. He was asking about body cameras.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. The body worn cameras pilot program is based on the need to really assess manpower and how much it takes to manage the data and the ability to respond to FOIAs and subpoenas. And until we have a good handle on that, being able to roll out 115 cameras is pretty daunting. And so, and to be sure that we're purchasing the right cameras, because the key for me is to have the right equipment that is sophisticated enough that is automatically activated. So there's not the opportunity for a manual mistake to happen when we want the footage and it was accidentally not turned on. And so we need to have a chance before we buy 115 cameras to be sure of the right technology and to be able to see what the manpower is to manage that. And as we sit here in May, to be able to pick the right cameras, to get them deployed in a pilot, and then to be able to roll that out, we're not going to be ready to know what that cost is, and to be able to handle that expenditure cost until we have some experience under our belt. And so we think the pilot program is really important to us. And realistically, it's a 6 month to 8 month process. And then we're going to be into budget development for May 1 of 2022.
My question is about the less illegal munitions launchers. Just a little bit of the history of this grant, and also the status.
Sure. So I believe the name of it is Jane Byrne Grant, administered to Cook County. Federal funds come in Cook County, and then they have the authority to further disperse it. Primarily for, only for equipment, for personnel or overtime. So we apply for that grant every year. We receive it's usually around, I think, $12,000 to $15,000 is about what we can get. And we've received lots of different things over the years, AEDs, received breaching tools that will allow us to respond to an active shooter where we need to be able to breach our way in to stop the threat to now less lethal launchers. So the less lethal launcher is one of the tools that we have at our disposal. Actually, I think it's extremely important because it provides us with a tool that we can use prior to having to use lethal force. And if we didn't have other tool options, then you're leaving an officer in a position where where their only choice is to use lethal force as soon as they feel that their life is threatened. I'll give you an example. You have a suicidal subject who's threatening to hurt themselves with a knife. They're 45 feet away. And time, distance, cover are all things that we want to use. We don't want to push this issue. We don't want to hurt them. We want to resolve it peacefully. And during the course of doing that, they decide that they want to approach the officer. At some point, that officer is going to feel that life is in danger and they're going to have to use lethal force. A less lethal launcher allows us to use an impact round at a distance to help secure that individual safely and not have to use lethal force. Tasers are another tool. The effective range on a taser, well, the max range of a taser is 25 feet. So you can't even deploy that against that individual in that scenario. And once we want to resolve it way before an officer has a chance to feel that their life is in danger. So we like to have multiple tools that we can employ to try to resolve that peacefully. Just to be example of how we would deploy it. We want one in every car because if you don't have one there when this is happening, you don't have the tool. And we've had many instances where we've had circumstances where something like this has occurred. And we used to have them just in supervisor's cars. The supervisor isn't always going to be there. And to allow our officers to have that option and to try to resolve it peacefully, why we want to have them there. Does that answer your question?
Oh, and the status.
Status is what's applied for. I don't honestly know if it's been approved or not. I can find out for you. Usually, they're awarded and then we receive the money next spring. We actually get the money this time.
Oh, John, sorry, let me, before we get, does anybody else have a question?
This is from Lewis Mercer. I am writing to urge the village board to find savings in its budget by shifting multiple modes of public safety away from the police department and to deeply scrutinize the department's spending. We as a village can reimagine public safety while simultaneously easing the burden on taxpayers. We currently give tens of millions of dollars to a police force that is asked to do too much and has unfortunately perpetuated racial injustices. This is the moment to create a more welcoming village, more focused on equity, diversity, and justice. First and foremost, it is imperative that the current CoResponder program be rethought to eliminate any police action when responding to nonviolent mental health crises. Non-police responses have been established in Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, San Francisco, California, and New York City, New York. These are multiple models we can use as inspiration for our own non-police response. The spending for this program would logically shift to our Health and Human Services Department, and the savings would come from the lowered need for police response, saving personnel, transportation, and other associated costs in the police department. The added bonuses would be less criminalization of those struggling with mental health in our village, a more compassionate and appropriate response to their needs, and less spending on future pensions as the need for more police officers goes down. Secondly, any spending by the police department should be deeply scrutinized item by item. For instance, though there is a grant for the purchase of the so-called less lethal munitions launchers, one can assume the weapons need ammunition and officers need training on using them, burdening the department with those associated costs. Indeed, the department is asking for $4,417 more this year for training ammunition. One must ask them, why does the department need these weapons? These are the weapons often used by police officers this past year during Black Lives Matter protests as riot control devices, sometimes causing the loss of eyes of peaceful protesters or innocent bystanders. What evidence is there to show these tools are effective to increase the likelihood for the successful resolution of such incidents without injury or death to the officer, the perpetrator, or an armed suicidal subject? What sources argue this? Also, why does the department need to replace the tactical intervention unit's communications equipment? What is wrong with the current communications equipment, and how often does the tactical intervention unit use its current communications equipment? For what purpose does the department need a Google Jamboard digital whiteboard display? Our teachers in the public schools don't even have those. If the department cannot prove with unbiased evidence that the equipment is necessary, it should be cut. Third, any changes that emerge from the use of force review, including the new body cam program and any training necessary for police officers, should be taken out of the existing police department budget. These are common sense reforms that should have existed already, and the burden of finding funding for them should not fall on the taxpayers, but rather on the police force itself. Finally, any decisions made about funding for the police department should be made with these statistics in mind. While the Black population of Skokie makes up 6.6% of the village, Black individuals made up 36% of the arrests between 2015 to 2020. While Latinx people make up 11.2% of the village population, they made up 19% of the arrests between 2015 to 2020. And while white people make up 60.5% of the population, they only accounted for 36% of the arrests by the police between 2015 to 2020. These racial and ethnic disparities highlight the large extent of the problem of racism in our community's response to public safety. The police do not have a public relations problem, they have an equity problem. Our communities of color are over-policed. Lessening the number of police and thus lessening the amount of interactions between police and communities of color is essential to create a more equitable society. As you seek to find savings in your budget, there is no better time than now to take a fine-tooth comb to the police department, which is the single largest burden on taxpayers. Thank you to the village board for your continued support of equity and diversity. Sincerely, Louis Mercer, Skokie. This is from Maggie Vandermeer. Dear Mayor Van Duzen and Board of Trustees, I'm writing tonight in relation to the review of the Skokie Police budget. I commend the village and police chief for their openness to pursuing an alternate response program, a model that is gaining traction across the state and country. The Community Emergency Services and Support Act, which just passed in the House and has been sent to the Senate, is a bill that will require an emergency response option for mental health emergencies that does not involve any police or law enforcement based on the CAHOOTS model in Eugene, Oregon. We need to be prepared to pivot in this direction. Knowing that we have already committed to a CoResponder program in our village and seeing that our state will push us further to an alternative responder program, I would urge the village to be forward-thinking and investing significantly more money in health and human services instead of the police budget. Right now, the proposed police budget is $18.1 million, not including an additional $4.7 million for police pensions and remaining debt for the police station. Meanwhile, the health and human services budget is only $1.4 million. We are asking our police to do way too much. We need to redirect that work and the accompanying fund to health and human services where we can actually address the root causes of violence, not to mention the many other non-violent issues that police are now responding to. A huge additional benefit is that by cutting back on the number of police officers required by the village, we will see significant future savings and less police pensions. There are some very specific areas that we can make changes in right now. I'd urge you to have funding for the body cam pilot program come out of the existing police budget rather than adding funds for it. This is another expense that will grow as the body cam program grows to meet state requirements. I'd also urge you to put all funding for the CoResponder pilot program towards health and human services instead of adding it to the police budget. In terms of changes made in response to the use of force policy review, I'd urge you to step back and commit to not making any changes that invest more money into the police department. Funding for training should come from the existing budget. I'm also very concerned about the grant application for less lethal munitions launchers. Why does the Skokie Police Department need more weapons, in particular weapons meant for riot control? Another big concern I have is how in the final meetings of the Public Safety Commission, almost all focus was placed on investing in public relations for the police. I'd like to say more about that in a moment, but as it relates to the budget, we should remember that one of the dangers of police reform is funneling more money into the police department for superficial improvements. Please do not put money towards these efforts. The idea that if the public just had a better opinion of police, respected them more, and trusted them, all our issues would be solved and is incredibly harmful. You are gaslighting communities who've been victimized by police brutality and systemic racism for generations by suggesting that it's just a misrepresentation. This is not true, even at the local level, as evidenced by our arrest and use of force statistics, which I would like to remind you of. And this is word for word the same as the statistics before regarding white and black. These numbers are not insignificant, and to continue to ignore them in favor of the opinions of a very law enforcement heavy commission is a huge glaring problem. Please do not think that community relations, police and records, news profiles, or officers or infomercials are going to build trust. What needs to happen as a start is those arrest demographics need to change, and to do that, we need to start by acknowledging the problem. The problem is systemic racism, which has been institutionalized not only in policing, but in every institution from education to healthcare. This is not a personal attack on officers. It's a fact that we need to face honestly. I believe that officers are also trapped in this inhumane system and that everyone benefits when we fight for liberation together. I hope that you can see this too and that you will make budget decisions accordingly. Thank you, Maggie Vandermeer, 60077. This is from Molly Greening. To the mayor and board of trustees. Swords and plowshares. This phrase initially comes from the book of Isaiah in the Hebrew Bible, but the message is one that I hope the village of Skokie will heed. Transform the materials used for weapons of war into tools that will make the entire community prosper. Excuse me. Currently, the police department's budget is over 10 times the amount allocated to health and human resources. When I have discussions about policing with people in Skokie from varying places on the political spectrum, everyone agrees that police officers are often asked to respond to crises that are far beyond their scope. Investing in the health and well-being of the community will mean less reliance on police and a forward-thinking approach to vibrant flourishing for our Skokie community. This is why I am urging for the pilot program to be expanded and transferred to be under the supervision of the Department of Health and Human Services. Taking a preventative approach rather than a punitive approach will be beneficial for Skokie in multiple ways. It would be an opportunity to reduce incidences of bias and discrimination that can mean life or death for people stereotyped and criminalized in this country's long legacy of racism, particularly toward indigenous, Black and Latinx people regarding police brutality. Please do not invest in riot gear. This will only escalate the fear and distrust that trained officers and community members. It could also be an opportunity to address the root causes of issues that police are often responding to. People who are struggling with housing insecurity, mental health crises, domestic violence, substance abuse, and poverty, for example, need more resources and support long before the situation escalates to the point of calling police. Criminalization often only furthers many of the above-mentioned challenges. Preventative measures that focus on resource support also end up being more cost-effective in the long run, an issue that should be at the forefront of concern as the village tackles its own debt crisis. It would also give Skokie an opportunity to analyze and address systemic inequalities and legacies of trauma coming from racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, ageism, xenophobia, and many other forms of structural injustice and how they function locally. I have written to Senator Ron Villavoran about supporting the Community and Emergency Services Support Act, and I am supportive that the village is already starting to think about accountability for current police officers through the use of body cameras. Where money is allocated sends a strong message to citizens about what the village values, and this is an excellent opportunity to demonstrate this new board's priorities for the future. Sincerely, Molly Greening, 4821 Hall Street, Skokie. Carrie Braden writes the next one. Dear Skokie Village Board, I am writing to request that you please reduce the budget for the police department and rather reinvest those funds in services that build community wellness, particularly for communities most often marginalized. Specifically, I ask that you please establish an alternative response program run by the Health and Human Services Department to respond to calls that do not require police intervention. The police department takes up a whopping 30.6% of the FY22 budget, far more than any other department, without even taking into consideration the expensive police pensions. Particularly in a year when the village must reduce expenses due to the economic impact of the pandemic, I encourage you to scrutinize all spending on policing and carefully consider whether those funds actually enhance public safety and wellness. For example, why is the department requesting less lethal munitions launchers, apparently riot control weapons now? In a community that boasts of our diversity and proudly displays Black Lives Matter signs, why would the village invest in riot control after a summer of Black Lives Matter protests that were met with militarized police escalations in cities around the country? What message would this purchase send to Black Skokie residents? Please also do not invest funds in public relations campaigns to try to build trust with communities of color. These efforts can be harmful and wasteful of resources that could truly improve the lives of communities of color. In 2020, Skokie police arrested more Black people, 2,806, than white, 2,788, despite the fact that Black people make up 6.6% of Skokie residents, while white people make up 60.5% of Skokie residents. Skokie police also reported that Latinx people make up 19% of the arrests, despite only making up 11.2% of Skokie residents. Even more alarmingly, Skokie police reported that 45% of arrests with use of force were of Black people in 2020. This data is evidence that the problem of racism and policing that harms Black and brown people is not a problem that exists elsewhere that Skokie is somehow immune to, as seemed to be the message in the most recent Public Safety Commission meeting. The origins of policing in the United States are rooted in racism and white supremacy, and to deny that Black and brown people are harmed by policing in Skokie and to ask them to trust police is gaslighting. To build trust requires apologizing, repairing harm done, and committing to never cause harm again. To be clear, I am not charging Skokie police officers with racist intent. We must all do the work to reimagine and rebuild our institutions, to free ourselves of the white supremacy that is rooted in all our systems. Intent is not greater than impact. The racist impact of policing is clear, so we must take steps to reimagine public safety. One way to begin to build real trust in public safety would be to reduce unnecessary confrontation between police and citizens. I appreciate that the village is trying to improve responses to calls through its CoResponder pilot. I encourage the village to take the next important step and transform the CoResponder pilot into an alternative response program that will allow trained, unarmed, qualified professionals instead of police to respond to calls related to mental behavioral health, substance use, housing, social services, quality of life, and nonviolent conflicts. This program should be run by the Health and Human Services Department, not the police department. When armed police show up to a situation, their very presence, regardless of whether they have the best of intentions, can escalate a situation due to the very real fear many people, particularly those who have been harmed by police in the past, feel. As Brett Hodgkin, a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in trauma recovery explains, maybe the person in crisis has experienced incarceration or violence at the hands of the police. They've experienced violations of safety from all angles. Sometimes a person's entire future can hang in the balance of crisis resolution. Will I walk away from this conflict? Will I find my will to keep trying? Will I allow this stranger to help me get to a hospital or a loved one? It's often tenuous. The risk of police on scene ups the ante immediately, as does the presence of a weapon. The air changes. We can't work towards safety when the danger is right there in the room with us. Clinical social worker and certified clinical trauma professional, as a licensed clinical social worker and certified clinical trauma professional myself with experience working in crisis response, I have seen the harm caused by the presence of armed police. We can only help people in crisis find a sense of safety when they do not perceive our presence as a threat. Therefore, we must be able to respond without police presence. Several cities have already successfully implemented alternative response programs, including Austin, Texas, Eugene, Oregon, Olympia, Washington, and San Francisco, California. I'm gonna pause. Excuse me. And I should mention, this is not in the written comments, but I should mention that several of these alternative response programs were part of the research that we did as we were developing our CoResponder program. But back to the public comment. Notably, the CAHOOTS program was established in 1989 in Eugene. By 2019, CAHOOTS teams were responding to roughly 1/5 of all 911 calls, only 1% of which required police assistance. In more than 3 decades of operation, CAHOOTS reports that it has never had a critical incident or serious injury to staff or the clients it serves. Here in Illinois, the House recently unanimously passed legislation that would require alternative response programs without police involvement. Community Emergency Services Supports Act was developed in partnership with the family of Stefan Watts, a 15-year-old with a disability whom police killed in his home. It would create a 911 response option separate from police for mental and behavioral health emergencies everywhere an ambulance service exists, and would require responders to de-escalate and then connect callers to their existing care providers or to available community service and supports. It is not a crime to need mental health services, so police should not respond to these calls. This act is currently in the Senate and will likely be passed given the unanimous support in the House. I urge Skokie to focus on developing an alternative response program now rather than building a co-responder program, only to have to replace it with an alternative response program later to align with the state law. Moreover, with a co-responder program, we run the risk of making it more difficult for qualified responding professionals in an eventual alternative response program to build trust with community members if they are already associated with police. The longer we delay creating an alternative response program, the harder it becomes to build trust. There is a broad support for an alternative response program, including among police themselves. According to Betsy Pearl and Amos Irwin of the Center for American Progress, citing data from the Alliance for Safety and Justice, across the country, support for civilian first responders is on the rise. Nearly 8 in 10 American voters are now in favor of diverting mental health and substance abuse related 911 calls to train non-police professionals. Importantly, police leaders themselves are joining the movement to shift away from the status quo. Every patrol officer knows that we respond to the same addresses and the same people over and over, explained retired police officer David Franco, a more than 30-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department. Instead of sending an officer to put a Band-Aid on the issue for a day or two, we should send mental health and de-escalation experts who are actually equipped to find long-term solutions. We should all be able to agree on an alternative response program that supports police officers in removing calls that are not a fit for them, and it supports communities in reducing police confrontations and providing greater access to needed resources. Additionally, please do not delay in requiring the use of body cameras by all police. We cannot build trust when there is secrecy about police confrontations. Please also ensure that the funding for these body cameras does not increase the cost of policing. Body cameras should be funded by cutting unnecessary items from the police budget, not by increasing the already enormous police budget. Our village manager wrote in his budget memo, the village will continue to be intentional about prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in its policymaking and operations. Please take this statement seriously and consider what would be truly equitable and promote real diversity and inclusion in Skokie. Given the glaring inequities in arrests and use of force against Black residents, we are not living up to our goal of equity, but we can change that. Skokie boasts of our diversity and excellence, leading the country in so many of our services and initiatives. In this moment of need to reevaluate spending at the same time as a national racial reckoning, Skokie has an opportunity to lead in the nation to create a truly innovative alternative response program to reduce the burden on future taxpayers facing mounting costs of police pensions and to truly invest in community wellness, equity, and safety. Thank you, Carrie Braden, licensed clinical social worker, 8631 Central Park Avenue, This is from Lawrence Walters. Dear Village of Skokie, I applaud your steps at piloting some programs that are taking steps to improve public safety in the village. Specifically, the CoResponder Program is a very exciting step. As you look to the budget tonight, I would ask that you think about running and assigning the budget to future CoResponder programs out of the Health and Human Services Department. Right now, it is very police and fire centric, and the Health and Human Services is engaged only when deemed necessary. I think for the safety of our most marginalized communities, we need to reverse this and empower the Health and Human Services to make the decision to involve the police department. Given our disproportionate arrest rates of Black Skokians relative to their population share in Skokie, I think making HHS, Health and Human Services, the first touch point in these situations could be one small step toward reducing the systemic racism in Skokie. Thanks, Lawrence Walters. This is from Kathleen Boyle. As citizens and taxpayers in Skokie, we are writing to express my concern over the police budget, specifically any funding for the body camera program, which ensures accountability on the part of individuals that our police encounter, as well as our police officers, should come from our existing budget, not be added to it. Also, funding for the CoResponder pilot program should go to the Health and Human Services budget, not the police budget. Changes that emerge from the use of force policy review, like retraining, should come from the police department's existing budget, not be added to it. We would also like to know why the police department is seeking a grant for less lethal munitions launchers. This is a riot gear that is intended for crowd control, has a proven and sustained need for this been proven. Why are we putting more money towards weapons at all? More funding should go towards Health and Human Services, where it has been proven time and again that they can address the root cause of violence and crime. The vast majority of police calls in our community are actually nonviolent calls for human services. So it boggles the mind that the police budget is 18.1 million and the proposed Health and Human Services budget is 1.4 million, a 16.7 million difference. Our police cannot and should not be asked to address every societal problem. Let's put that work and the funding for it in the hands of Health and Human Services where it belongs. Like many municipalities, the village is facing a massive budget deficit due to police and fire department pensions. The proposed police budget does not include the additional 4.7 million that the village will have to come up with to contribute and or any money to pay the debt from the construction of the police station 10 years ago. This makes it obvious that investing more in Health and Human Services staff as opposed to police, because police pensions are huge expense thanks to effective union lobbying downstate. Let's put our money where it will actually impact the needs of our residents rather than into pensions. That bleed money and do nothing for everyday residents. In the last two Public Safety Commission meetings, a major emphasis is being placed on public relations, implying that the problem isn't the police. The problem is that the police don't understand, appreciate, or respect the police, don't know what they do, and have misguided by the media is shameful and wrong. This rhetoric is abusive gaslighting. It's going to mean funneling money towards things like community relations and PR, not the services that people need. We don't need more visits from Officer Friendly, and we are not doing great, as New Skokie suggests. The police department cannot buy trust. Trust is built by seizing harm. Our village does have issues, so let's not lull ourselves into believing otherwise. Here's just one of many statistics that point conclusively toward the need for expanding funding for our Health and Human Services Department and that funding. A general demographic breakdown of Skokie residents by race using the same language used by the police department is white, 60.5%, African American, 6.6%, Hispanic, 11.2%, Asian, 26.6%. However, total arrest percentages average from 2015 to 20 are, and these are the exact same percentages as before, except Asian, I don't think they mentioned it, was 7%. When you look at the table for use of force used during arrest, the numbers are even worse. The percentage for African Americans goes up to 45%. Skokie should be leading the state by preemptively embracing a Community Emergency Services and Support Act, which has just passed the State House. We should not need state mandates to get Skokie officials to demonstrate genuine compassionate care and responsible concern for our residents. Sincerely, a family that expects better. Oh. This is from the Abolition Coalition. Dear Mayor Van Dusen and Board of Trustees, we are writing in regards to the review of the Skokie Police budget. We would first like to acknowledge the village and the Skokie Police Department for their willingness to pursue an alternate response program. Skokie has already committed to the CoResponder Program, and we should continue to take forward-thinking steps and commit to investing more money and resources in health and human services instead of the police budget. Right now, the proposed police budget is 18.1 million, not including an additional 4.7 million for police pensions and remaining debt to the police station. Meanwhile, the budget for health and human services is only 1.4 million. The police department takes up a whopping 30.6% of the, sorry, this is word for word, similar to previous ones. 30.6% of the FY22 budget, far more than any other department, without even taking into consideration the expensive police pensions, particularly in a year when the village must reduce expenses due to the economic impact of the pandemic. I encourage you to scrutinize all spending on policing and carefully consider whether those funds actually enhance public safety and wellness. For example, why is the department requesting less lethal munitions launchers, apparently riot control weapons now? We are currently asking our police to do way too much. We need to redirect that work and the accompanying funding to health and human services where we can actually address the root causes of violence, not to mention the many other nonviolent issues the police are now responding to. A huge additional benefit is that by cutting back on the number of police officers required by the village, we will see significant future savings and less police pensions. Several cities have already successfully implemented alternate response programs, including Austin, Eugene, Olympia, San Francisco. Notably, the Cahoots program was established in '89 in Eugene. By 2019, Cahoots teams were responding to roughly 1/5 of all 911 calls, only 1% of which required police assistance. In more than 3 decades of operation, Cahoots reports that it has never had a critical incident or serious injury to staff or the clients it serves. Please do not delay in requiring the use of body cameras by all police. We cannot build trust when there is secrecy about police confrontations. Please also ensure that the funding for these body cameras does not increase the cost of policing. Body cameras should be funded by cutting unnecessary items from the police budget, not by increasing the already enormous police budget. Your immediate reallocation of funds from unnecessary spending on policing to health and human services is in the best interest of equity and inclusion, part of your professional vision, part of your professed vision for Skokie. We have asked for both a community meeting to address concerns and a racial equity liaison that will actively address the concerns of the BIPOC families of Skokie. This will also build trust and transparency so that we can move collectively for the well-being of our Black, Brown, BIPOC families. We look forward to your response regarding our concerns. Sincerely, Monique Cooley-Hicks, Natasha Lavalius, Roxanne Salgado, Angela Sanga-Gadsden, and Jasmine Sabagalala, and of the Abolition Coalition. That concludes the police public comments.
Take it in the water. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Mayor.
Good seeing you again.
Next up is the fire department. Ebola.
Evening, everyone.
And our new deputy chief. Congratulations.
Evening.
All yours.
Thank you, first of all. Yes, please. No doubt either. So thank you for having me here this evening. As I begin, I'd like to just acknowledge our staff, Deputy Chief Captain Fergal and Deputy Chief Dick Ashner. Unfortunately, PC Fergal cannot be here with us this evening. But I want to acknowledge their work in their oversight of our administrative division, our operations division, emergency medical services, and fire prevention.
They, along with our battalion chiefs and captains, do an excellent job of providing services to the village, which we take great pride in. The battalion chiefs manage day-to-day operations as well as administrative functions such as training, EMS, fleet management, operational guidelines, etc. So they contribute significantly to our overall services to the community. I want to give you some highlights of accomplishments and challenges for FY 2021. Professional development was one of our main focuses. We have a very young department, a lot of new and developing officers. This is both a challenge and it's also invigorating. With a lot of new officers who really are learning and developing. One of them here is certainly an example of that. We're quite proud of his accomplishments already, and I think there's a very bright future for our organization. We also embraced, along with other members or other departments of the village, we also embraced greater equity within the department. Deputy Chief Regala was one of the original members of the village's equity, diversity, and inclusion team, and is working with our staff, command staff, to incorporate some of those ideas and changes in the organization. I also participated in the YWCAC program, and I'm finding that that's very beneficial to me personally, and I know that it will pay big dividends for the department as well. Some of the other accomplishments more recently, we established a mentoring program for our new firefighters and also a probationary firefighter appraisal report, which allows a more formal and consistent feedback to those new firefighters so that they understand where they can best, how they can best improve. Getting some other challenges. Of course, the big one in this past year has been COVID-19. Certainly, it has created many challenges for our department and the community. But I am quite proud of how our staff stepped up and met those challenges. Early on in the pandemic, we, based on the direction of the manager, we opened up our emergency operating center and really brought together a remarkable effort from all the department heads, and actually each department contributed significantly to the collaboration of policy change, gathering of PPE, eventually leading to initiating the vaccinations for our staff, and then possibly we were able to eventually start the vaccination pod for the community. Really an outstanding effort, and very complimentary of all departments, particularly our health and services director, Mike Turner. That one of the challenges with COVID-19 also was, though, that it did cause some disruption to our training. Obviously, many classes were shut down. So that would be difficult to get some people into some necessary training. We were able to keep the mandated training in-house going, and our paramedics continue that training going. So we were able to continue those efforts. But there was a slight disruption in the outside training availability. Deputy Chief Regala also contributed with our seeking reimbursement for COVID expenses through the Public Assistance Grant Program. And actually, we are very confident that we'll get some of those expenses covered through that grant program. I also want to talk about fleet. Our fleet has made some major, got over some major hurdles this past year. We had several apparatus that had some corrosion issues. Some of that were due for some refurbishment. Our apparatus committee, working with automotive division, and the vendor of some of our manufacturers, Pierce Manufacturing, really took a collaborative approach, and we were able to get quite a bit of corrosion issues addressed, and actually replaced frame rails on several of our frontline apparatus, including truck 18, squad 18, engine 18, and engine 17. And some of those expenses were borne by the manufacturer. We were able to then consequently get truck 18 fully refurbished. And if you get a chance to see it, it looks like a brand new rig. I think it was a very efficient use of village funds, and I thank the village board for your support of it. We also currently are have a grant submitted to FEMA for an AFG grant, an Assistance for Firefighting grant, for the purchase of the new tower. So we are hopeful that we'll be able to purchase a new tower ladder that will replace a 1995 tower ladder that's currently in reserve, and will definitely help our overall fleet condition. Get that grant. I want to touch base on EMS. Obviously, it's a huge part of the services that we provide to the community. Obviously, during COVID, that was also impacted. Actually, from the period of approximately mid-March to late May, early June, call volume actually went down for EMS type calls because people were didn't want to go to the hospital, and so they weren't calling us. Consequently, there was an increase in cardiac arrests, and there were also later the call volume then increased because people had unfortunately let their healthcare go. So we put together some information in the village website on a couple of antennas, encouraging people to not neglect their personal health, that it is safe to be transported when necessary, and they should neglect their care because of COVID. Additionally, we initiated over the past couple of years, things such as pit crew CPR, which is a method of performing CPR very efficiently. The auto bumpers, which you approved in the budget last year, which allow us to perform automates the chest compressions and really does allow more efficient CPR. And then the purchase of additional cardiac monitors and defibrillator, which really are at the highest level of technology that allows direct feedback on whether the treatments that we're doing, including CPR compressions, are giving the best possible level of care to that patient. And it's really technical, highly technical and expensive piece of equipment, but it really is remarkable in how well it assists us in ensuring that we give the best possible care. We've been working on, or we continue to work on ways of find ways to cut costs and also expand our revenue sources. That's obviously a never-ending challenge. 2019, we increased our, actually 2019, 2020, we increased our ambulance billing rate slightly. We also initiated emergency incident cost recovery, which allows us to recover some of our operating expenses when responding to car fires, vehicle accidents, structure fires. That's a relatively new program, but it is becoming more successful. Notable for both of those programs is those costs don't go directly to the taxpayer, they're absorbed by their insurance. We also last year joined a federal program called GEMS, Ground Emergency Medical Transport Funding, which allows us to capture a greater amount of the costs for treating Medicare patients. Significant amount of money that otherwise would not go collected by the village. It's a new program that the state of Illinois entered into. It's proving to be highly successful. Part of that program requires us to complete an annual cost report. So with the help of our finance director, we complete an annual cost report, and the actual cost borne for staffing equipment, managing the department, managing the services is pretty significant, probably $3,000 plus per animal's cost. Being able to capture a greater portion of that than what we would be able to capture before is helping greatly. As far as the department's reputation and commitment to continuing to serve professionally, we continue our efforts to be accredited. We actually today received notification that our annual compliance report was approved, and so we remain fully accredited. This coming year, actually this current year, we are in the process of our reaccreditation. So we have a pretty big task ahead of us this year. We have to have our reaccreditation submitted by the end of September, and then we go for a hearing next March. So we'll have our hands full with that. We also are still an ISO Class 1 fire department, and that is really it's the highest rating that you can have, and it's based on a lot of things, including the water supply of the community, communications system, training levels, staffing levels, fleet, Vegas agreements, etc. So it's really a comprehensive evaluation of our department. Obviously, we're very appreciative of the support that we have from the village board to make that ISO Class 1 rating. It's certainly not just a reflection on the fire department, but on the village as a whole. So for our major goals and objectives for this coming year, or FY22, we want to continue our efforts in professional development at all ranks and positions. That was one of the goals that we added when I first became the fire chief, of developing and maintaining a succession. And we feel it's important. My background as a training officer for village for a number of years, and so it's something I'm passionate about, and it's something I truly believe in, and I know will pay dividends to make sure that we're the best trained and equipped and prepared staff. We are also currently and want to continue to enhance the drill power. We have a lot of ongoing maintenance that we've embraced. A lot of that work is being done in-house by our own personnel, and it's really starting to take shape, and will make the training power even more versatile for our use, and then selectively share training with the fire department and some of our other neighboring departments. So I appreciate the village's support of the drill power and our agreement to be working with them. I can see it as very advantageous to both organizations, both communities. I mentioned we're continuing on our reaccreditation. Then we're also continuing to aggressively pursue grant funding. So as I mentioned, we have the AFG grant for that power ladder, which we anticipate hearing something about sometime perhaps in late May or June. And then we have also submitted a staffing grant for 5 firefighter positions. Typically, you don't hear about those until September, October, November. And then finally, we have a very good working relationship with our labor union, and work with them to make sure that we're all working in the same direction, making sure that we're all positively serving the community. And so far, we've enjoyed a good working relationship. We currently are in negotiations for their contract. And then also, they are with the Evanston's Fire Union are working to develop another Fire Ops 101 program. I know some of you participated in that a few years ago. I'd like to keep that as an opportunity for all of the staff, those board of trustees, to learn more about what it means to be a firefighter, and you know, what some equipment that we use, and you know, how beneficial training is, et cetera. So we should be receiving some information about that if you have already invitations to participate or observe. Okay, I went through that pretty fast, because I know the last one went a little long. So any questions? Yes.
I just thank you for all you do. The only question I have is what is the manpower number?
So our current staffing is that we have 105 sworn members. Who's, you know, obviously we have some frozen positions, which is why we're seeking the state review.
Okay, thank
Yes.
Did you see that?
How often does the accreditation process? For the accreditation,
It's 5 years.
every 5 years. And did you say that you were recouping insurance money for just Medicare or for other insurance as well for the ambulance?
So the ambulance billing increase, that is for any EMS transport. And so that would be paid, that expense is incurred by their insurance.
And then you
we
said-
do not balance those through our taxpayers.
So there's no cost to it. It's
Right.
just strictly insurance, right?
Right.
Okay, I wanted to also say thank you for all you did during COVID and the first responders were remarkable. I'm super proud of all of you during that time. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Really, our paramedics, our EMTs did a really remarkable job, are doing a remarkable job, and I like to be very proud of them. But I also want to just acknowledge the great community effort. I mean, I really think overall the village as a whole really got on board with following the guidelines, and obviously it was a huge sacrifice for a lot of our business owners, and it's, you know, it's unfortunate. But I think the fact that we, you know, everyone got on board, and a great effort of the manager's office and Health and Human Services to get our vaccinations out there is really going to help us turn around quickly.
I just had a quick question. The snapshot, there was mention of good intent calls. What's it good intent?
So we pride ourselves on our service level, you know, and so we're kind of the ones that fix people's problems. And I know all the departments kind of have that attitude. So a good intent call could be anything from somebody smelled something, or thought they smelled smoke and it turned out to be a skunk, okay? Or somebody saw something in the backyard and thought something their neighbor was having a fire, it turned out to be a grill. So those are good intent calls. And it could be a wide range of things.
Thank you.
Wow. Help us catch that.
Thank you for your service. Thank you.
Thank you. So good to be without a mask. Thank you. All. Have a good evening.
Congratulations.
You don't want everything.
No.
I'll send you the water.
Yes. Thank you. Or is it a right here? I'm gonna learn this by myself because I'm an adult.
What have we got? You're gonna give Matt and Glenn.
No, they were-
No.
There.
Yeah.
Trust me.
I'm running for house. Mary, Vicky,
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I got to the house.
I don't know.
Everybody, Matt Randmeyer, Director of Community Development, Len Becker, our Economic Development Manager. Page 56 for Community Development, 81 and 83 for Economic Development. Yeah. Matt,
Thank you, Mayor.
welcome.
Just provide an overview. And to start off, I wanted to say that we're proposing to save $200,000, nearly $200,000 in the budget this year. That is primarily due to realizing reduced management position and not filling a planning position. Neighborhood services is a key. Excuse me. Neighborhood services is a key element of our annual goals this year. We essentially previously had combined building property standards, and now we're separating those into two different divisions, building services and neighborhood services. Neighborhood services is a combination of CDBG program, housing and neighborhood initiatives, and the property standards, which is some of the code enforcement. It follows a nationwide trend to combine assistance efforts with code enforcement on a neighborhood level. And there's essentially natural linkages between kind of our housing and neighborhood services to code enforcement initiatives. Other annual objectives that I'm proposing is to have a renewed focus on public service. I'm looking for our department to be more problem solving, to be less bureaucratic, to expedite development applications. I think we need to provide more information on the website and have a meaningful, application process, and kind of spell things out as far as applicants. Part of what I see is people get kind of lost in our process. We have a multi-step process, and I think we need to guide them through that. Overall, our building permit for our building division sees 4,000 permits a year. They do about 10,000 inspections. They're just a very busy group. So the improvements, I will be looking to eliminate redundancies and further implementing technology. Through COVID, we've been able to, bring more online applications and process those. Prior to COVID, we did about 25% of our applications were online, and 75% were over the counter. Over the past year, we flipped that. So we have 75% of our applications are coming, and then 25% over the counter. That reduces the kind of customer service interaction and just gets that permit application directly to the plan review.
Does it speed it up?
It does speed it up, absolutely. So we'll be looking to implement that more and essentially start to eliminate some of the steps in the process so that we can kind of quicken the speed of the review process and permit issue. With expedited development review, I will continue working with the planning team, focus on kind of larger issues, larger development issues, provide a quicker path for the smaller requests. I think a good example that you've seen recently, most of you have seen, was the mobile requests on TUI. They requested additional vacuum stations. They had to go through a full amendment process in order for that to happen, which took about 3 months. It takes time. And all they wanted to do was add 3 vacuum stations to their site. And it took us 3 months to complete that. In the future, I'd like to take the opportunity just to review and approve that on an administrative level and get them a permit in this new process. So I've been talking to Michael about how we do that. And we think we found a bundle of different items that we can identify as being minor or non-substantive. And then, instead of reviewing them through the plan commission for each board process. You can also expect a few text amendments, which means that we would update the zoning code to kind of loosen a few things up. One of the things we're working on is a change to our retail street requirement, essentially downtown from Skokie and Oakton, on Skokie Boulevard and Lincoln, and Warren. We really only allow retail or restaurant or personal services in those spaces. I'd like to open that up a little bit by allowing some office uses on the retail streets. You've seen some vacancies, I think, and I think the pandemic has made that worse. Evanston recently opened their retail street requirement up, and they're starting to allow offices, through a building permit process. I think we're going to start with just financial services and real estate services for now. There's demand out there, and then evaluate it. It is a big change from what we've done over the past few years, I think, and I think we still want to promote, restaurants and retail in the downtown. I think there's some spaces in between, offices would be a good use. And then I'll wrap up with upcoming developments, things that you can look forward to seeing in the next few months. You won't actually see this one, but it was approved by the Appearance Commission last night. It's the Impact Behavioral Health at Floral and Brown. They're proposing 16 units. Apparently, this site has had several proposals, and it looks like this one might move forward. So it's at Floral and Brown, the southeast corner. They're proposing 16 units that will be for people with disabilities. There'll be retail or commercial on the ground floor, and then 2 stories of residential above. You'll see on Woods Drive, just north of the Holocaust Museum, there's a dual branded hotel that is being proposed. You should see that in the upcoming months. There's another Dunkin', as we see more Dunkin'.
Not enough.
Right, one more is always good. A Dunkin' at Dempster in Lockwood, where there used to be a.
The old bank?
Yes. Right. So you'll see that. I think they'll need a special use permit. There's a proposed art gallery on Lincoln, just next to Chase Bank, which I don't think you'll see. Actually, you might see a storefront enhancement grant or something like that, but it's something that we've been reviewing internally. We're also working on at Dempster and Ewing. We're working on a 24-unit mixed-use development. They're recently removed the building. I know there's great interest in seeing the site be developed, and they're firming up their proposal. 24 units. I think they want to have more units. We're trying to figure out how we can get them. So that one I think is going to require maybe a code amendment, and then you'll see it through a site plan discussion. And then lastly, we've been talking to a developer about the redevelopment of industrial properties at Tui and Linder. Basically, there's at the northeast, and there's a signal right at, I think it's Central, and then over to Linder. There's a big mixed-use development, which will include commercial and then residential above. So we're just starting to work well. We've been working with them for quite a while, actually, but we've been looking at various iterations of the proposal. So that concludes what I wanted to tell you. Happy to answer any questions.
So
I wanted to ask about the dumpster viewing
Yes.
project, so that coming before the plan commission soon?
I hope in June or July. Yeah, it's very close. Yeah, and I think we're going to have to update the FAR, the floor area ratio requirement, but it should be very close to being represented.
Right, and then the other question is about the office space. Given the whole COVID experience, do you think there's market for office space?
For a smaller office, I think that what you're seeing, or what you hear and read about, I think there's, certainly larger employers that are, they may not be renewing their leases or reducing, their square footage. But I think the single user, the one person who has, a real estate, office or an account or something like that, I think there's certainly demand there. And I think they might be found now. They haven't had that opportunity. And I think the owners, the brokers, and the businesses, would, really like to see that happen. Yes, yeah, that's a good point. We regularly have inquiries.
Oh, that's,
Yeah,
that's
there
what I
you
was wondering. People are learning to work at home, so I didn't know how much. But you do have it.
Yes, yeah. I think that the larger employers that take up a whole floor of a large office building, I think they're making some decisions.
Thank you.
I was going to say COVID has really pushed us to think beyond what we have normally done. So I just wanted to appreciate your efforts for really taking advantage of an unfortunate situation and utilizing technology in a way very more user friendly. And also, dreaming about, offering partnerships and business folks an opportunity to have an easier path. So I just wanted to give you a shout out.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Glenn's going to talk more about our economic recovery and plan and the task force. And we're really proud of the work we did.
Thank you. Edie Sue addressed my question regarding office space. Thank you.
I apologize if I missed part of it. In terms of development along Main Street, what are some of the reasons that are deterring folks that are opportunities?
I think the biggest, you have a lot of obsolescence in the vacant buildings that are hard to rent. And part of that is certainly how the buildings are built and the floor space. But, there's also a parking issue. There's just not enough parking spaces. So that's, part of the challenge. We need to either consider how these can be redeveloped in a viable way and parked, as needed. A lot of that is, that's why we promote mixed use, and is that there are opportunities for the landowner to redevelop their property, and with considering the high construction costs and making a project viable, it requires greater density, greater square footage. So that's one consideration. We think if we're able to provide or find a place where we can provide public parking, perhaps those existing buildings could be reused. Different types of businesses could be, located there. I think those are the impediments. There's also, within a block, you might have 10 different owners. There's some very small spaces, and there's not a single owner, that would be looking to redevelop, the entire block. So it's very hard to really improve something if you're only dealing with 20 or 30 feet, of a storefront. So those are just some of the things that come, to mind. One of the objectives this year is to work on a strategy for Main Street. Really look at possibilities, see what economic development tools we have, what regulatory tools we have, and hopefully put a plan in action. It'd be a first step. I'm not clear about that, but I think we use that framework for Oakton as well, and then also for Dempster.
Thank you for your comments. I kind of probably an overly broad question about affordable housing affordability. Besides the Floral Avenue development, specifically for those two disabilities, I'm curious, these other mixed-use developments, how many of them are going to have affordable units? And I don't know the right question, but I wonder if you could say more about the obstacles to the multi-use developments that
Attracting affordable housing for new development. So we, every proposal we get, we've been talking to developers about, including affordable units, if they're proposing everything. And every time we hear it's not viable. And we've been trying to develop insight into that, kind of check that. A developer wants to make the most amount of money that they can afford. And so is there a path to kind of provide, kind of market rate as well as affordable units? And we've been developing insights. I think the biggest challenge is construction costs right now. A market rate rent is about $2 a square foot, right? So that's 1,000 square foot, apartment, you're going to pay $2,000 a month. That's market rate. That's, crossing the finish line and hopefully making a profit. $2.25 if they're really making a profit, right? $2.25 a square foot. Affordable housing in Skokie is about $1,250 a month. It's $1.25. So that's the gap that we have to fill. There are tools, but they're not really sufficient. To do that, you have to have other things in play in order for them. It's part of the reason why I've been advocating for, and I think it's our greatest resource when it comes to affordable housing. Our affordable housing stock is is the best, is what we should be focusing on. It's the missing middle. If you've heard that term used, it's used in a lot of these affordable housing discussions. We have that. So we don't need to build it. And so that's the thing that we should be focusing on. And I think we have a few CDBG programs in place. I think we can do better at targeting those, and identifying how we spend that money and where these places are. Hopefully improve, those buildings so that they're accessible and they're quality places to live. But, we have 19.9% right now. I think our challenge is first to maintain that and, kind of grow from there. Does that answer?
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Glenn Decker, Economic Development Manager. For those new trustees, it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I'm going to give a quick overview on economic development, the budget, what we've accomplished this past year, as well as the TIF discussion. Just understand overall that they're intertwined. TIF is a tax increment finance district, which is specific to 3 geographic areas within the village, and I'll get into that in a minute. I can't stress how proud I am to work with Matt and Leslie and our entire staff. One of the greatest, and I was reflecting on this, greatest moments about COVID, it was a horrible year. All that aside, we got closer to our business community than ever before. We've personally reached out to hundreds of Skokie businesses. We've effectuated change, both from a technical assistance standpoint. Their willingness to talk to us that we're not evil people, that we're sincere about trying to help them. And we've done that through a litany of efforts, and we quickly pivoted in March of last year as we all did. So the COVID response is really the major theme over the last year. With that being said, we were the first, under the mayor's leadership, the first suburban community to convene an economic recovery task force. we have the most comprehensive recovery plan, which has been executed and is sunsetting. And actually, we're taking some of those things into programming as we move forward. We've, I said, met with distributed materials, safety guidelines, applications for storefront enhancement grants, CDBG grants that were funneled through the village, a whole slew of marketing materials, both in person, online, and through email communications, any different medium that we could. We executed this year and we did it very well. Providing timely updates, factual information, being available to answer questions, basically 24/7, that's what we were doing. And we felt good doing it because not only were we helping the businesses in the community stay open, those that could, but also provide a resource for our residents, knowing who's open, who's closed, who delivers, and where they can get those vital services. So with that being said, we distributed, as of today, 63 grants through the COVID CARES Act to businesses throughout the village. And those are up to $5,000 for a total of $270,000. And that was through actually 3 tranches of CDBG funding specific for business assistance. We also provided, despite COVID again, storefront enhancement grants, and those are available to Skokie businesses not located within a TIF district to improve their facade, but also any interior rehabilitation. It's up to $43,000 per, up to the maximum of 43, and typically those are for restaurateurs. Other businesses, the grants could be as small as $2,000. That program started gaining traction about 3 years ago. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit, but we're going to look at ways to enhance that as one of our key objectives for this next year. The Economic Development Fund, which is about $900,000 a year, is funded primarily or solely through a real estate transaction tax, a transfer tax, which is fairly steady, pretty high on the residential side, but we do have some big commercial transactions we hope that will take place fairly soon. So we don't see anything going sideways with that fund. We think it'll at least remain there, if not go up a little bit. With that also being said, we have the TIF fund. So that is the tax increment generated by each of the 3 TIF districts. The West Dempster TIF district is up 29% over the last 10 years. The Downtown Science and Technology TIF district, which has been modified 3 times, the latest in 2009, is up 125%. And the newest TIF district, which is 6 acres, developer driven for the Homewood Suites by Hilton Hotel at Niles and Oakton, is up 9%. And that's primarily due to the triennial reassessment. So there's going to be some protests and that number might change a little bit. But what Matt said about streamlining the process is key for business. The quicker you can get them to open their doors, the better off we all are. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. So, you know, we're working in tandem, which is really important to note. The continued interest projects take years to come to fruition. And we've had projects continue through COVID, which is miraculous in a lot of ways. Not only have those projects continued, we've never been busier with interest in scope. Downtown, Old Orchard, I'll give an update later on Old Orchard, not tonight, but there will be some transformative changes there in a good way. So if you think about hitting the reset button when your computer blue screens, it's kind of what we're doing. And we're firing up on the newest and latest and greatest operating system. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Let me just touch on the tip. Typically, for those projects that we look at proposed for each of the TIP districts, we look at that project specifically on its own merits. It has to pay for itself. Some communities look at TIP districts and they look at it district-wide. We do not do that. If the project can't pay for itself, that's our first hurdle. And it's got to be good for the community. Overall economic development, we're built out, it's highest and best use, it's about redeveloping, and it's about creating wealth and opportunities for our current residents, businesses, and those that would like to come and scope with.
Thank you, that's super exciting. Just wondering, were there any specific efforts looking for diversity as far as in business?
So, it's interesting. Our business community is really reflective of the community and the diversity ingrained in Skokie. The chamber is working on specific outreach, specifically to minority businesses. And we're working with them in tandem, but they are leading the effort in that end. But, quite frankly, most businesses that we talk to are, like I said, very diverse. You could see that in our dining options. You could see that in the storefronts. So it's really cool, actually. And what we tried, with COVID, we try to really break down some of those barriers where, different groups really wouldn't talk to us. And we really tried to, between language barriers, maybe some cultural barriers, we've made some really good headway. And we want to continue to do that. And, the upcoming year, that's one of our main tenants. The other tenant is an economic development strategy, because the one we have right now is at its end of its life cycle. And the timing is perfect now that we're through last year. Thank you all. Thank you. We're always innovating. Every day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
No, Max?
We're building anticipation. No, I sent Nick a couple minutes ago. I was trying to get him queued up, so he's right outside the door. A little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Let's do it for.
Oh, we got Ross, so. Worst comes to worst.
Thank you. Yeah. Wrong. I'll take it in the day. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
You want water?
Miss.
Are you going to drink some water?
Yes.
You're far away, you can't say anything. No, but you offered me first next.
I get your own.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Listen, oh, look at you. You come along.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to see you.
Okay. Okay. The house will switch.
Very good, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm joined this evening, as most of you know, but just in case everybody doesn't know, by the Assistant Public Works Director, Liz Zimmerman, and by our Senior Civil Engineer, Russ Rietfeld. So we're going to walk through very quickly. I know we're running a little bit behind schedule. Run through a couple of the key highlights, I think, for this evening in the Public Works budget. I know you've received the materials, and so I will certainly allow you to ask whatever questions you may have about whatever is in the budget. But just to hit the highlights, obviously, the Public Works budget for this year is forecasted to increase by 2.7% or $309,000. And most of the increased levels of spending in the budget are related to waste and recycling related cost increases. We have seen an increase in the last year in the tonnage of waste going to Swank, as well as an increase in the cost to dispose of that waste, as well as we have contractual cost increases coming our way here in the next month for the curbside recycling program. The only sort of true new item of spending that's in our budget is the $20,000 we have allocated in there to do the greenhouse gas emissions inventory work. Those funds are allocated in the budget to allow us to complete one of our goals in the 2016 to 2021 sustainability plan, to get a good data baseline for us and for the Environmental Commission to work towards the development of the next sustainability plan. We being Liz and I, have interviewed 3 different vendors for this service. We feel very comfortable with the $20,000 that's allocated in the budget for us to be able to accomplish the completion of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We think that work will probably be completed around October or thereabouts. We would, of course, wait for the board approval of the budget and for authorization for us to proceed with that spending. But having said that, we feel like we'll be able to move that forward in short order and make good progress on that. We have not formally selected a firm, but we have made the necessary inquiries to meet the requirements of our purchasing policy. And the Assistant Finance Director, Michael Lexick, is aware of our progress on that. So we are prepared to move forward with that in short order. Refuse fees. So we certainly, I was here Monday night. We had a little bit of discussion on the refuse fee. As you know from the materials and from the discussion, the intention was to lay out a revenue generation option to try and offset some of the costs that we're seeing in the refuse operation. You know, from the revenue and expenditure overview presentation, Skokie charges a very low amount per year as compared to many of our comparable communities for the totality of the services that we provide, as well from the survey data. Most of our comparable communities charge a refuse fee or user fee of some type, be that for the refuse service or for yard waste services or any of the package of services for which we currently charge none. The background, as you know, refuse tonnage increased significantly during the pandemic. In fact, we got our April tonnage figure today, which closes out our fiscal year 21 tonnage. We ended up at 20,432 tons delivered to Swank for the year, which is about 2,000 tons more than we had in our last year. I would note that a portion of that tonnage was attributable not only to the impacts of COVID, which we estimate is probably about a 10 to 11% increase in our refuse tonnage, but I would recall as well, we had 2 significant rainfall events last May, and when that happens in Skokie, when we experience a significant number of basement backups, you can probably expect to see about 500 to 600 tons of extra material going to our waste stream. So if you want to call that out. But nonetheless, we saw in May and June last year sort of the combined effects of that rainfall event plus the impact of people staying home and working from home. We saw an increase in tonnages of 20 to 23% for those months versus what we would see in a normal year. So as it worked out for the totality of the year, I believe that puts us about 11% in tonnage over for the year. So that certainly has had a significant impact. The tipping component from a swank standpoint, the tipping fee will go up 1.19% for the next year. To backtrack just for a moment, because we over-delivered on our tonnage for swank, how that works is, as we go through the year, we are charged monthly for our tonnage delivery to swank. It is based on a rolling 3-year average of what we've done for the last 3 years. So we get a monthly set charge. We get our expense trued up at the end of the fiscal year. So if we over-deliver, we have to pay a true up. That true up charge is normally assessed beginning in December of the following year. So in December of this year, we will begin to pay for the overage that we delivered for the period just completed in April. So that's when you sort of pay the piper for your overage, or if you under-deliver, you will receive it credit. So that is when we will see really the impact.
An overdraft, fee, or is that assessed as the average?
It is assessed on a per ton basis. They charge you over 4 months, beginning in December.
For the trip, I believe it's 3 months.
So that's an extra to the invoice amount for those months. So that's what's sort of happening on what we call the wet waste side of the world. From the recycling side of the world, the recycling cost is going to increase by 18.9%. It is a sort of the culmination, the long process that's led us to this cost increase. We are exiting the 5-year base contract period to the contract that we have with Lakeshore. Sort of seeing the first impact of the changes in the recycling commodity market that really dates back to 2018. Changes in the worldwide recycling commodity market from soared in China, which began the impacts on shutting down some of the world's premier markets for recyclable commodities was into the Chinese marketplace, and that was limited, obviously exacerbated by the tariffs and some of the trade war impacts with China, as well as an increasing standard for contamination of commodities that were going into that market, caused a significant disruptions in the recycling market such that processing costs became higher, the commodity values became lower. So we're seeing those impacts now. At the same time, the marketplace is disrupted enough that it is very difficult to forecast in the midterm what the future of those markets is. So were we to go out to bid for a new longer-term contract, the market is extremely uncertain. So while this is a negotiated 1-year extension that we're looking at, it would be, in my estimation, pretty risky for us to go to bid and seek a new long-term deal right now, because my advice to the board would be you would probably get a worse deal than this. I don't think it's a good time to go to market. I think it's a good time to bide your time and let this settle more. So that's what's happening in the recycling part of the world. Cart replacement. Cart replacement is a significant cost item in scope. We go through how much money?
I'm not sure, I mean, budgeted for some.
So we go through quite a bit of carts in this community, and we have some active squirrels in this town. They're very active. So a lot going on the cost structure in the refuse world. So we heard some of the board discussion the other night on a couple of things. How does this work towards waste reduction goals? What can we do with respect to the potentialities for pay-as-you-throw or volume-based fee structures? Challenges to a pay-as-you-throw system or doing different container sizes. Well, the first challenge for differential container sizes is obviously currently we're not set up to do that. Doesn't mean that we can't change. But that sort of change would need to, I think, be well thought out, just for the logistical challenges that are out there. We have 16,000 single-family properties in town with 16,000 95-gallon containers for refuse and 65-gallon containers for recycling. So we need to think through the program approach for how we would intend to do that. Attaching that to fees, or particularly the notion of attaching differential fees based on selection of a container size. That is an approach that is out there, where communities offer a choice of a 32-gallon toter for a price per month versus a 65 versus a 95. Difficult and challenging to do, I would say, in an alley environment. Talking with Lakeshore about that, they said, you know, and I think this rings true to me, and I think everybody in this room who has a property on an alley, toters in an alley become sort of a communal property in that, you know, if you don't have room in your toter, what do? Well, I go to my neighbor's toter and I put it in there. So it's not hard to imagine that the frugal-minded amongst us will select the lowest possible cost container size, and if I need more room, well, I'll just carefully look around. And I know I have that situation at my home in an alley setting, and I happen to have 2 toters, and I'm amazed at everybody else who uses my toter. It's just the way of the world, right? So there are some challenges with doing that. Similarly, I have heard suggestions that could you do a sticker form of program with stickers on a toter or stickers on bags. You don't tend to see stickers, particularly on bags, in an urban setting that you're in. It's hard to imagine how, for example, the health department would respond to stickers on bags placed for disposal. You will see that in Southwest or West suburban communities, Batavia, Geneva, St. Charles do that to allow people to sort of customize their refuse options. We don't tend to see that in the near Chicago area. So I think there is some potentiality in the future for us to consider that. But to me, I think the time to consider that is when you're making a more fundamental change to your system. Because to do that, I think you're really looking at the potentiality for wholesale change to your model. If you're going to offer people the opportunity to select different toter sizes and in essence, perhaps on a user fee basis, you're actually probably intend at giving people the opportunity to subscribe to a service level. Dare I say, one might choose to offer the opportunity to subscribe to a once a week or a twice a week service. If you're going to offer people the opportunity to select a service level, there are a lot of permutations of that. So I think there is some potentiality there if there's a fee in place, and if we want to make people more motivated to select their solution and give them more incentive to make different choices. I think there's certainly potentialities there. But I think it needs to be a well thought out, well conceived approach. It's not something we want to throw out there. Additional staff for enforcement, the more that we put into place things like stickers, obviously we need compliance. It's one thing to put those stickers on a bag in St. Charles on 1.5 acre lot sizes in sort of the rural subdivision setting and the Stephen setting at the curb, which is what we see in the alley environment. So some different challenges rear their heads. Some of the programs that we do offer and maybe represent good opportunities for us to expand our recycling. Textile recycling program that we offer through Simple Recycling, I think is a popular program amongst those who participate in it. Don't know that it's a well understood program or as widely used as perhaps it should be. Want to chime in on that at all?
Well, right now it's limited to single family homes, and that's not our decision, that's Simple Recycling. And I'm not exactly sure the reason. It's something to do with the collection model. And so we do get complaints from condos wanting to participate. We don't really have that avenue for them. The program is extremely easy to run. I probably only get 5 calls a year on it or something. So it's really worth it. We probably, just need to think about marketing it in different ways with all of our recycling programs.
Just other things to call out on there, the Spring Green event has been really successful, and I know you guys are familiar with that event. The collective resource composting franchise agreement. Collective resource and boosting that program, I think is important to us. It's the last thing I would say on that list that we added. And that's, we've given the collective an exclusive franchise agreement to be the service provider for this service in our community. She's up now, she and Arlene Howard is up to 210 customers in Skokie. So she's making progress, but it's sort of a slow and steady progress. In the last year, tonnage collected from that program has been 47.5%.
Yeah, we're averaging about, one little bucket at a time, we're averaging 4 tons.
So I think that's fertile ground for us, but I think, go ahead and jump to the next slide. But anyway, there's a slide I'm looking for. I think all of those, that's one. I think all of those speak to the same theme about boosting any of those programs and any of the recycling initiatives. Fundamentally, I think it's still all about the education component. I'll call out as indicated on the first bullet point. 81% of our residents in the 2018 survey thought that more education on what materials can be recycled would increase participation. And when we talk about that as the environmental commission, I think sometimes we'll sort of scratch our heads a little bit because we think, gosh, that seems sort of basic, and that we as staff and as the commissioners think we know that pretty well. But yet it speaks to the fact that even though it's basics for the commissioners, it speaks to the need to continually go back to sort of what we might think of as basics, but yet for our community, they need reinforcement and they need continual education. So for us, I think that's the most important thing.
Sure. I think the challenge is, we can push material out, but I think we're taking a deeper dive into maybe more marketing research on what's effective. I just had the experience with, we pushed out a compost video. And so I was looking at the different analytics on there, and, we think we probably got about 10 signups, out of that work. But that was a lot of work. That was, I know I put in 8 hours to that. And we had, several people working on that. And so, we're really trying to identify those opportunities that require, some more minimal effort or have a higher output.
I have a real quick question on that. When you say you look at the deep dive on the analyticals and 10 people signed up, do you know how many people opened the video?
Well, on YouTube, I think it's fairly easy, right? It was just,
The views, yeah.
yeah,
The
the views are-
views. So do you have any idea how many views we had? And that would tell us a great deal too. If 1,000 people looked at it and only 10 signed up, but if only 20 people looked at it and 10 signed up, then that tells you a different number.
right.
399 views.
Thank you.
We've been looking at things like that,
Right.
right? And, yeah.
So you got to look at those percentages also.
And I pushed it on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is great. You can see how many, people are looking at it. It's all interesting, right? How many people do the first level of maybe just reading a post and then
Correct.
actually watching the video, and then how many people sign up. So, so we're just doing more research on what works, I guess, and what other communities have done that works. So, the CIAC or Sustainability Commission, they're heavily involved in the education component of this. So they help us out with promotional events. The library is a really great resource for us because people will check that library calendar, and they'll, want to go to a solar program, a recycling program, something like that. Versus if the village hosts it, there's just not as many people looking to us for programs. Chamber of Commerce talks, we do, and then CF was involved in the Backlot Bash Zero Waste event from 2 years ago, which was a dirty job of sitting there and sorting out waste. they signed up, and we had a whole bunch of volunteers sign up, and they were great. We talked to our recycling hauler on a regular basis to try to see what other communities are doing, what programs there might be to kind of incentivize, more recycling. We work with Anne closely on pushing out material on the website, so news and Newscope and Swank as well, another great partner for that. And yeah, just other ideas like we pushed out that video. That's some of it.
Don't see schools. You gotta take advantage.
Oh. So we-
Kids are.
Yeah. Yeah, we do some communication with schools. So Swank has a really great program on solid waste for the little kids, and I'll push that out to my school contacts whenever that becomes available. If there's any school-specific Swank programs, I'll push that out. But I do want to work on a more extensive email list for that. So just to give an example, Swank had a program only for schools for a hazardous waste day for paint and that kind of stuff. So I was able to push that out to Judge Pontiac.
So I think we want to pause at this point. From a presentation standpoint, we'll talk about some public improvement things with Russ, but I guess I want to give you the opportunity to discuss the refuse fee elements. If you wish to do that for a moment. How do you want to proceed?
Right, we just wanted to give an opportunity, if there are questions or thoughts that you're having about the refuse fee, we just wanted to provide an opportunity to entertain those comments and questions.
I have a question about the UC from twice a week ago that was on the where you talk about the that if you did that your public works department would that do recycling, and I guess I just want to understand we don't have the infrastructure in place to do that. So what would that entail? If there were to happen someday, what would you, because right now we pay a company, so what would be required of our public works department
What would be required of us to take on
to take that on,
the
Like-
recycling?
to have the infrastructure to do it?
Well, right now, what would be required now is actually just slight expansion of our fleet, of our staffing. So I didn't, in your question, presuppose we continue with twice a week refuse collection.
Let's say we did, let's say it was once a week, and
We would, yeah, so if we, the common notion, as we discussed that, what if in terms of years has been that for us to take on recycling, that we would probably need to drop to once a week. If we did not, we would need to expand our fleet. Once upon a time, we might have been robust enough in terms of trucks that we could figure out a way to do all of that. That day is coming and gone. So as we reduce staffing level over time, we reduce our ability to do all of those things at the same time. So we would need to reduce the refuse service level in order to be able to do that. Frankly, in the last 8 to 10 years, we reduced that level and the fleet count that's in refuse that we would now need to slightly expand ourselves back up to be.
but are they different? Are they different trucks?
It's the same collection truck. So the ones that Lakeshore typically runs on the collection routes are slightly smaller than ours, but that's just because that's what they buy. But if you see the collection system in Chicago, the trucks are interchangeable. In fact, they have a sign on the side of the truck that they flip from one day it'll say garbage, and then flip the sign around. The next day it says recycling. It's just so they can demonstrate to residents. If they see it servicing recycling, they want to say recycling on the side, not us. So.
And then on the education side, so I walk a lot and I see all these people with their recycle bins with lots of plastic bags in them, and I know that that's not okay. So that's still an education thing. We've been talking about this for years, and yet when you walk around the neighborhood, you see that that's what they're putting, and then according to what you have, that doesn't go through the machine. And so what happens to that, all that recycle that people are using plastic bags? What happens to it?
It goes to to Lake Shore's MRF, and it flies around through the air, and it winds up their sorting equipment, and periodically causes the line to get shut down when it's tangled. The
So
foliage
they don't do
becomes-
anything to
it
take
becomes
that,
waste.
yeah.
Right.
So I think
So-
part of the question is, you're not supposed to bag recyclables. So if recyclables are received bag at the MRF, the first step is to take them out of the bag. And then those bags are not recyclable, so they go to the landfill eventually. And even if I put all of my grocery store bags in my recycling cart, they're gonna end up at the landfill. The MRF has a way of, through technology, taking out things that are not recyclable, and then it just ends up going to a landfill, unfortunately.
I thought I heard in the past, like, whatever they put in those plastic bags doesn't get recycled. Because it's going through with the plastic bag. The stuff inside it is getting recycled, even though the plastic is going in their machine.
I think usually it does, based on the times I've been there and seen it come through the lines. And because after it goes through the automated machinery, which is shooting puffs of air to get the products to separate, it's going to come through on the belt. And so it's going to rely on that point of going a conveyor belt that's whizzing by with all these things on it, and you have a line up of human beings that are picking items off of them. And so it should get caught in that process, but some of the materials that might still be inside of that bag, so that it hasn't been ripped or told and what was in there has come out. Some of it probably ends up being wasted though, yes.
And before COVID, we had talked about having to take on another note, for these plastic bags to go, and then COVID happened. But we were talking about maybe right now you take them to like Jewel or some other retail stores, but maybe thinking of like drop off. So that's still something that we're thinking about.
Well, we are thinking about it, but I think we want to comment on that. I mean, I think our point of emphasis right now is going to be to push those retailer or big box opportunities that are out there now. You know, I had a conversation recently with Evanston about the program that they're running, and they're still running it sort of on the same model, which is I think there are 7 or 8 of their community facilities where they do the drop off, and the bags are gathered up by public works staff, taken back to their recycling center. And Dave Stoneback said, you know, the public works staff then has to sort through the bags that are in those bags and separate out the bags that aren't appropriate to be in there, and then they're gathered and they're trucked by Jewel. And so he said, you know, it is a fairly labor intensive program for them, even though it doesn't cost, because they're working with Jewel, it doesn't cost for Jewel to haul that to the company that repurposes those bags. So I think that for us, it seems like the smart place still is to utilize those other community resources that are in place versus taking it on directly ourselves.
There's a lot more opportunities just in the last year. I mean, it went from Jewel to Mariana, Kohl's, Walmart, Target. Yeah, there's it's just almost every load to, yeah.
But I think COVID kind of interrupted that whole process. Nobody was going anywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Let's do the first level and the opportunity are there and premium cost if cost is in. Are there concerns? National. Where
I think the biggest challenge or concern I would have about a system like that, we see systems like that. We have seen them in our area. We have seen most of them come and go. There might still be some out there. I've always thought the biggest challenge of a system like that in Skokie is, again, comes back to the alley collection. The difficulty of identifying the service location by address. with 70-something% of your stops being in the alley, not all of the garages or locations in the alley being identified by address, differentiating who is on that different service level. And again, sort of the issue of the free rider in the alley, neighbors figuring out who's got elevated service levels and collections and fly dumping and some of those things. To me, that seems the biggest challenge. Not a carry out at the curb community where there's a little more guarding of the toner and somebody's less likely to abuse that.
So the, as Congress says, right now, we're going twice. Increase the cost by 50%.
If we dropped it once a week, we'll decrease the cost by 50%. No.
What about the domino effect for the men, if we went to once a week, the people who work there, then during other times, they do other things. But what would be the domino effect, let's say for like snow?
So if you went to once a week, there would not be, trustee Robinson's question, there would not be just, oh, it's kind of going to happen, right? It's not that linear relationship. We've cut a portion of that resource, but to get to the employee question, the village had a long-standing philosophy for 35 years, 40 years. We are following a layoff approach. I don't believe that's changing. So whatever might happen in terms of effectuating the service change, so they have some impact on our employees, that would be something that would be an overtime attrition of positions that versus anything that would happen in terms of effectuating some of the change. In terms of those assets, though, you're correct. I mean, the garbage trucks are used as snowplows in our system. So we go from our current 12 garbage trucks down to 6. Is that taking away snowplowing assets from the village? Yes. So yeah, it has an effect. Would we need one-for-one replacement? Well, it depends. The snow plows on the garbage trucks are not literally used in every plowing operation that we do, but they're probably used in 40 to 50%. If a 2-inch snowfall event happens, those plows probably don't get used. If a 4-inch snowfall happens, those plows get used. So a more severe winter, a winter with more significant snowfall events, those units are getting used. And so if we don't have those, one of two things happens. You either have to go find an asset to replace it and have them sitting around, so you have to go figure out how to acquire them, either buy them, lease them, rent some company or contractor to provide them for you, or you're altering your service level and you're not going to plow as much as quick. So that, yeah, something has to give it.
I just want to say one more thing about that. It's the intangible. It was something that people in school have come to expect, and they brag about it. And they like it. It's still quality of living here. So I'm still not in favor of eliminating 1 2 per week. I still want like. So that's my.
James? Yeah.
For refuse fee, I support the refuse fee. I just have a lot, I feel like I have a lot of questions. If it was a standard fee, whatever, for every home, I'm concerned that it might be a little aggressive, that it might go much bigger. On lower income residents and families. Are there ways to more equitably introduce so that this would not be more disproportionate? Yeah.
Under tier fee
If I can
structure.
ask, are you asking for a tier per year or a tier per family? You're getting the same service. I think that all families personally have to pay equally. We're talking about a tier in the 3 years. I would support that, but I don't think we can personally give the same option to people. Same service, but say that because someone's income is higher, they have to pay more. I don't think that's
Maybe I should ask, when we talk about different tiered versions of this, I think I'd like more information about what tier means. But that's a wider question.
I think the approach that has been taken for the discussion is that, you know, as of today, there's 0 fee. And the cost of the $6 million approximate program equals a $26 approximate cost. And so stepping that fee in and setting the first year at a third of the cost, $875, is intended to be kind of a tiered approach for the fee. And then that $875 is the lowest fee in the area of any municipality that we surveyed, those 23 municipalities. And so the intent is to be cost conscious with the rollout of the fee.
I need to repeat my question. I'll get back to you. I also wanted to ask about the greenhouse gas emissions audit. And I know that we've never done this before, right? But ideally, how often would we do this in the future in order to kind of measure changes in emissions over time?
That's a good question. I don't know that I don't have a hard and fast answer to that for sure. I would guess something 5 years-ish. I mean, we've had a couple conversations with a couple of different consultants about it.
One vendor that had 3 different snapshots, and I honestly can't remember if it was every 5 years or every 10, but they wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'd have to do some thinking about that. Thought one had done snapshots at 4 years. So somewhere in that time range.
Interesting snapshot. You know, this is going to be so helpful for helping us gauge where our emissions are coming from, and extent of our emissions, long-term work, and use, and these effective.
Do you have a question?
No, nothing more.
Oh.
Nothing further, thank you.
This is from Judy Mendel. Our Public Works Department does a great job. Whenever I've noticed something or had a question, I got a response or action right away. In times of snowstorms, the snowplow crew is great, and I think these are the same people who pick up garbage. But in this time of strained budget, Skokie needs to take a good look at all line items. I have lived in Skokie since 2001. Back then, I thought it odd that recycling was every other week and garbage was twice a week. I brought this up to the mayor multiple times at our Williamsburg Village homeowners annual meeting. One response was that Skokie was able to hire full-time garbage workers because garbage was picked up twice and yard waste once a week. I admit this is admirable, but I would bet that we are the only community around that does this. In my neighborhood, take a census and see how many homes put out garbage twice a week. And perhaps some of these people don't need to, as their cans are not full. In addition, from a sustainability view, not only does twice a week garbage pickup not encourage, reduce, reuse, recycle, it's a waste of gas to go fully around Skokie twice. And now, since we don't have to ask for yard waste pickup, the trucks go around a third time in our neighborhood for very few pickups. Another waste of gas. There must be a reason that the village stopped asking people to ask for pickup requests. Yours truly, Judy Mendel, 24 Williamsburg Terrace, Evanston 602 Oakland.
How are you?
Good evening. So a couple projects we wanted to highlight. It's actually two non-village projects, but they'll definitely affect us and our residents and commuters. So the first one is a NICOR gas project. This project's starting soon. We expect them to start May 24th, so that is a week from Monday. It's a 24-inch gas transmission main replacement of an existing main. The highlighted route in the red there, for the most part, the main will begin near Oakton and Skokie Boulevard, and it'll go east down Oakton to Keeney, and then it'll go north on Keeney for a block, Kenton, and then it will run east on Keeney for a block to Hamlin to go south to Oakton, and then it ducks into the NICOR yard just east of Central Park. And then there's also a small portion south of Oakton on Kenton that'll cross the tracks and tie into an existing NICOR facility. The next screenshot here is, and forgive me, I know this is very, very, very engineer, but that's the screenshot from IDOT's plans. And so you can't really see it too well on this one, so I'll go to the next one. But this is the IDOT triangle of Dempster, Niles Center, and Skokie Boulevard. So we have Dempster right here. This is Niles Center, and here's Skokie Boulevard. And this will be an intersection improvement, including channelization, traffic signal modernization, and resurfacing. The pre-construction meeting for this project is next Friday, May 21st. So we're expecting this project to start very soon. Last year, they began with the utility relocations. So if you've driven through the area, you'll notice that it's a little bumpy. That'll be improved through this project for sure. This project will be this construction season and next construction season. So this is the completion date on this project is October of 2022. The eastbound Dempster left turn lane will be lengthened. So there'll be additional turn lane going back. We'll add a right turn lane at northbound Niles Center. Northbound Skokie Boulevard at Dempster will also get a right turn lane. Westbound Dempster at Skokie Boulevard will get an additional turn lane. And then southbound Niles Center at Dempster will get an additional turn lane as well. So this should be very, very beneficial to movement through the area. And then I do not have a diagram for this, but a few interesting bike lane and bike path projects that I wanted to mention. The Skokie Valley Trail from Dempster to Gulf. Design is currently underway. I would expect construction in 2022 or 2023. We're still a little bit into the preliminary design, so I can't really estimate construction exactly. The IDOT has a limited number of lettings every year, so there's still a number of things that need to fall into place until we know when that construction will be exactly. But I would expect it next year, or likely probably 2023. North of Old Orchard, the Skokie Valley Trail, we're working on completing that with our neighboring communities. And then I believe we're also working on improvements to Main Street and Niles Center intersection. And that I think will be the final piece. A little bit there will be the final piece, and then the Skokie Valley Trail after those three projects will be complete through the village. We're doing a project on Church Street. We're going to add some bike lanes on Church Street. That project's going to happen next year in 2022. And finally, the Old Orchard bike path. So we're working on a couple final connections, one at Harms and one at Skokie Boulevard, and those projects will be completed this year.
Question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Monday night board meeting.
On Tuesday.
Tuesday.
night.
Sorry, Tuesday.
Sorry. I'll be here Monday night.
Yeah.
And then Thursday night is the final that concluding budget meeting. We have a couple of graduations, I think, right?
I won't be here, I'll be at
Right, you have a graduation. And you have another graduation.
Which Friday?
Oh, they're Friday. Oh, so you'll be here next Thursday?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood that. But, so, James, you'll be missing.
Is that virtual or in person?
Virtual, until the governor. From what I understand from this afternoon, it's expected the governor is going to amend his emergency declaration. We're expecting that will include having in-person board meetings, and that you will be permitted to have more than 50 people at a public setting, which would open up
What was the date you gave, June what?
11. That's what we're told. But I haven't been.
No, it's tentative at this point.
So the June 11th.
Yes. It look, all of the indicators at this moment look like it'll happen on June 11th, but the final decision is not going to